Welcome back. The death toll from Monday's clashes between herders and farmers in central Nigeria's Plateau state has now risen to 85. The region, which is divided between the Muslim north and Christian south, has been struggling with ethnic and religious violence for years now. Police say it's still unclear what prompted the latest round of killings. Tit-for-tat attacks between the groups often spiral into raids on villages by heavily armed gangs. We can talk more about this then with Afolabi Adekaiyaoja, who's a research analyst with the Center for Democracy and Development in Abuja. Very good evening to you, sir. Grateful for your time. So this is not new violence, but no one seems to be able to tell, am I right, why things have kicked off and ended in such tragedy.
Yes, unfortunately, what we've been seeing is actually just a recurring pattern that has actually been unfolding. A lot of identity crisis has been taking place in Nigeria's country, in Nigeria, and the elections that took place in February and March were just a very glaring example of how divided the country is along identity lines. Now, the North Central has usually been more melting pot of the country. So whereas you have a mostly dominant Christian South, you have a mostly dominant Muslim North, the middle belt has usually been a place where different tribes, different religions have interacted and come together. And usually there's been a semblance of peace and harmony. But unfortunately, due to recent attacks and recent clashes, we've been seeing a change in the way that particular interaction is going along. And a very big issue is around resources. So the particular example that we have today now is one where we have herders who are predominantly from the northern part of the country, who by culture are used to being nomads and going around the country, now clashing with farmers who are based in the south, who are actively trying to manage their own different parts of the land in the country. Now, there have been different attempts by governments and by different other, well-meaning Nigerians to really try to have a better collaboration and a better conversation around how to manage these particular, pastures and even grazing routes. But unfortunately, ultimately, what we've seen is a case where either due to miscommunication or even due to the weaponization of identity as has been used during the election period, we're still seeing clashes between these different groups, and that has led to the unfortunate incidents that we've had over the weekend.
Does it all boil down, Afolabi, to religion and ethnicity?
It ultimately boils down to a clash of cultures, really. So when you're looking at it through ethnicity and religion, it's a fairly simplistic approach, only because there are multiple dimensions in the way that these things are really played around, especially when you look across the middle belt. So over the election period, CDD, along with the Armed Conflict Location and Defense Data Project, ACLED, actively tried to track how election violence was taking place across the country and across 6 different geopolitical zones. Now, the incidents that took place happened in the North Central, which is a group of 6 states that are predominantly in the middle part of the country across the confluence rivers. Now, the issue in play really comes down to the fact that the particular ethnic groups from the north coming in are used to into nomadic movements, and then therefore they use different undefined grazing routes to actually try and carry out their different practices. But in the south, because of another issue dealing from economic uncertainty and different clashes, groups are actively now trying to leverage more of their farming, of the items that they get from their farms. Now the clash is not taking place because of the fact that there's been little or no communication or even agreements, and even in the sense of just moving roughshod across the particular groups. Now, historically, there's been allowances and there's been issues where, there have been arrangements where, if you cross across a particular farming route and then you don't have that level of, and you haven't been given permission, it's usually a case where there might be some settlements made. But what we are seeing now is that because of a growing sense of fear, because of a growing sense of, economic uncertainty, and even just the general this communication that's going on, groups are not actively banding together to create armed militias across these particular different areas. Now, what you're now seeing is that beyond the different state sanction area, beyond law enforcement, beyond even those different, other, police structures, what you're now seeing is groups coming together to defend themselves using different structures. So you might have farmers that are banding together to say, okay, fine, we'll form an armed militia to protect ourselves against any incoming, herder group. You will now find herders who are now grouping together to say, okay, fine, we'll move together in one large group across this particular side, knowing fully well that it's unlikely that we are going to get attacked if we go as we block. So what this now means is that you're having a clash of groups where groups are actively expecting to have to engage in some confrontation, and that is ultimately just going to keep fostering a sense of disunity. We have an incoming government in Benue State coming in, new state governments, and then obviously the new president-elect. But ultimately, one of the big questions, one of the big issues that they will have to address is effectively making sure that these particular groups are not just catered to and listened to, but that they are well-defined structures going forward, because this is not something that's new. We've had a lot of issues and a lot of incidents going on for the last 8 years and even beyond. But only going forward, especially because of the exacerbating issues around the economy, growing even the way that NST was recognized during the election period, it's only going to get worse unless there are concerted efforts to address this.
And is the government even still in any position, I wonder, to bring an end to this violence? Are they even trying in a meaningful way? Because as we've been saying, this is not the first time we've seen this level of bloodshed.
So, as you might be aware, we have a change in government on the 29th of May. So in just over 11 days, we will have a new president, and also there will be a new governor in the states, in particular in Plateau State, and also in quite a number of the states governments, particularly in the North Central. Now, in terms of what is being done today, there's really little that can be put in place in terms of any planning or any preparation that has already been done over the last couple of years, which is actually one of the sad points of this current administration. Now, what we are hopeful for and what a lot of Nigerians will be looking out for will be what the new administrations will do, both at federal and state level. A lot of communication has to be done, a lot of understanding, and even just general planning has to be put in place. The current government tried to put in well-defined grazing routes, and even tried to have a bill that would pass that would allow these particular groups to move across the country and across defined area that they could now move. But at the national legislature, different representatives agreed for different reasons. The primary one being that there was no accommodation for really covering and for really balancing the farmers who were going to be affected, and it just gave the impression that the herders were now more dominant than other parts of the country. In fact, the issue that's going on right now is in the North Central, but then over parts of around this time last year, there were more incidents happening in the southwestern part of the country, and that's also in a different part of the area where we had similar clashes between herders and the farmer groups there, especially around the forests in the southwest. So, in terms of really directly answering the question, the government isn't doing much, and the government isn't in a position to change its strategy with only 11 days left to the end of the administration. Now, what we are actively looking for and what we are actively going to be monitoring is to see what the new administration will be doing, whether there will be a lot of collaboration across the different state governments, whether there will be a very set plan put in place for the National Assembly once it reconvenes the 13th of June, to ensure that there is a strong, sustainable, lasting solution. And when that really takes into account the different nuances and the different, challenges and different cultural norms that these different groups have and that have been using for decades past.
Afolabi Adekaiyaoja, good to speak to you.